You will not pry these dip manicures out of my cold, lifeless, dead hands. Like, you will not. Like, my $55 dip manicures, like,
She
they
knows
are
she likes
here.
to spend
Yeah,
money.
they are here to stay.
I'm your host, Ariana, and this is Hot Girls Have.
Hello and welcome back to Hot Girls Have. Have you ever wondered if you have any red flags in your spending habits? Maybe you've struggled with debt and aren't sure what's normal versus what's too much. Do you ever look at your credit card score and ask, what is this? And is girl math a hot trend or a total trap? Today, I have Paige Pritchard, a certified life coach and money guru to women spenders. We'll be talking about overspending, how to stop impulse shopping, and the worst things to spend money on. Paige, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. This is going to be such a fun conversation.
I'm so excited. So we were talking before this about how there is quite literally nobody like Paige on the internet. And if there is, there are not enough of them because Paige is what I would like to call a de-influencer. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of what you would call yourself as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really kind of refer to myself as like a spending coach, but I think de-influencing has been a huge trend in the past year. And it's a trend that I was like, this is what I talk about every single day. Like, I haven't thought about it this way, but this is what I do. So I jumped on the bandwagon and I was like, if this is what I have to call myself now, I will. So yeah, it just worked out perfectly.
I love it. Okay, so let's start with the basics. How do you define impulse shopping and how do you define overspending?
Okay, great question. Let's talk about overspending first. So the way that I define it, right? Like my brand is called like overcoming overspending. And I think the most obvious answer to that question is spending more than you make or driving yourself into debt. I actually define overspending as any spending that you're doing against your own good. So any spending that is like harming the future version of you and her financial success. So that absolutely could look like spending more than you make, or it could also look like spending your money in ways that just aren't helping you and not serving you. So like, for instance, if you use shopping kind of as like a coping mechanism, right? Like if you shop a lot when you're feeling negative emotion, you're bored, you're sad, you're lonely, and shopping is the tool that you use,
dopamine.
Yeah, to kind of make yourself feel better.
Right.
Or if your spending is impacting you in other non-financial ways, like are you spending a lot of your time shopping? Is it impacting the health of your relationships? So I kind of define overspending in my world, at least, is just think about any spending that you're doing that's against future you. Impulse shopping really kind of has to do with like the timing of how you're spending money. So impulse shopping is more seeing something that you want to buy and being in this cycle, this very quick, fast cycle of see it, want it, buy it. And I feel like this is a cycle that a lot of us have gotten into, not only with the rise in social media, but also just with the advances of technology, probably in like the last 5 years.
Amazon.
Like think about how much Amazon has changed the way that we shopped in like 5 years, right? Or how much social media has changed the way we shop and spend money in the past couple of years.
Or now you can shop on Instagram and TikTok and all those apps.
All the time. So impulse shopping is more of like the timing of the purchase. It's like how much of a time gap is there between seeing something that you want to buy and then actually buying it. That's more of like the impulse shopping. And then think of overspending as just like any spending that you're doing that's not really to the benefit of future you.
Tell me, what are 5 signs that you have a problem with spending?
A couple of things to kind of look out for here. So one is, let's just start with the most obvious that I think is usually the wake-up call to people, which is your spending and shopping impacting you negatively financially?
Right.
I think that's the thing that wakes people up the most initially. So are you in debt? I think that's the most obvious one. But also, just because you're not in debt doesn't mean it's not a problem. But I think debt is a big indicator. Are you spending more than you're making? How much time are you spending on shopping? This is actually a really big one because a lot of the women that come to me and that I start working with, when I actually start having them think about the amount of time that they're spending with shopping, it's way more than they actually realize when they start to bring conscious thought to it. So
does that mean like that subconscious, like scrolling?
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's like the kind of like the whole spectrum of the process. So it's like, how much time are you spending just like looking for stuff, looking for deals, researching things that you want to buy, looking at the new arrivals page of your favorite retailers, to actually buying things, to tracking packages, to unboxing things, to returning things and reselling things that you bought and you're no longer using.
It's kind of an obsession.
Yeah. So when you actually total all of that up, it's not just like the amount of time that you're going, okay, click, buy now, right? It's like the whole spectrum of like, how much time am I actually spending on this? So are you spending a lot of time? Is your shopping impacting your life in other ways non-financially? This is also a big one. Is it starting to impact your relationships? So if you're in a relationship, is it causing friction and tension between you and your partner? Or are other people in your life, maybe like a spouse or a parent or a sibling or maybe like a close friend, like it's causing rifts in your relationship? If you know my story, I actually, like the reason I do this work today is because I actually used to be a compulsive shopper myself about when I was your age, about over a decade ago. But also
I did read that you in 1 year had completely shopped your entire salary.
I did do that.
That is a wake-up call.
That was definitely a wake-up call. But one key indication to me was that I started to hide my behavior, because like I knew it was becoming a problem. And it was the year after I graduated from college, I moved back in with my parents. So I was living at home with my parents, and I would actually start hiding all of my purchases. Like I would bring shopping bags in when I knew that they weren't home. I would bring packages in when I knew that they weren't home. Do you use shopping kind of as like an emotional crutch? This is what we were saying earlier.
Right.
It's like paying attention to the mood that you're in when you start to shop. There's been a lot of studies that show that like a compulsive shopper or buyer compared to like a normal buyer, the biggest differentiator between those two things is the mood that you're in when you start to shop.
So like, are you having a bad day and then going to shop to try to feel better?
Yeah.
Versus, oh, it's a nice Sunday. Oh, I could go shop around with some friends.
Yeah.
We're all in a great mood. Those are two totally different headspaces.
Exactly. It's just like, are you using shopping as a tool to change your emotional state? Because the reason that becomes a problem is because shopping will never actually be the fix that you're looking for.
Shopping is
like
not therapy.
That's
shopping
the tricky
is
part.
not therapy. Yeah. Let's make that clear.
Retail therapy is actually just kind of like this guise that like gets pushed out to us of like, oh, you're having a bad day, go to Target. Oh, you're having a bad day, like curl up in bed with a glass of wine and pull up your favorite website and do some shopping. That's the whole problem with it, is that we view it as like, oh, this is going to make me feel so good and make me feel better. The tricky part is like it does temporarily, because of course we do get a release of dopamine and we do kind of get that euphoric, like, oh, this feels so good, I'm so happy. But shopping is just like any other form of overconsumption. Like when you eat too much sugar, you're going to have a sugar crash. And when you drink too much alcohol, you're going to have a hangover. And when you shop too much, you're going to have what I call like a spending crash. And so that's why for anyone listening, if you've ever gone out and like had this huge shopping spree, or you've bought all this stuff online, it probably felt great in the moment. And then by the time you got home, or by the time all the packages got there, you go into this like, like what did I do? This like guilt and panic, and you start to spiral. It's the exact same thing. So all those are just things to kind of look out and consider, like, is this getting to a point where I might want to start taking steps to like form healthier spending habits?
Okay, so now I want to get into a little bit of you as a coach and as a human being. I've read that your two favorite things to spend money on are convenience and personal development.
Yeah.
Love that. What two things do you never spend money on?
Ooh, gosh, such a good question. Well, I think like, okay, I can't say that anything is coming to mind in terms of like, I never spend money on this thing, but I actually think that this question brings up a really important part of this conversation, because I think spending is all about figuring out what you value.
Right.
A lot of you might have heard the term like value-based spending. So I'll tell you this. So, okay, when I was in my younger 20s and when I impulse shopped my way through my $60,000 salary, crazy. I have that story is like all over my social media. So if you want to hear more about that story, like go to my TikTok.
It's a really good story.
It's pinned on the top of my page. So when I did that, what most of that money got spent on was clothes, shoes, jewelry, handbags, things like that. So I can tell you now, 10 years later, that's probably the category that I spend the least in. And so when I was 22, 23, I think I had this idea in my head of like, I'm this like corporate working girl. Like I kind of had, like Jennifer Garner, like her closet from like 13 going on 30 or like Devil Wears Prada. Like that's how I thought that like my closet should look and my wardrobe should look.
And you're like, I'm young, I'm entering
I'm young,
this
like
new era of me.
I
just
know.
get out with the old and with the new.
Yeah. When in reality, I was working at a car dealership with a bunch of men who I literally could have worn a potato sack to work and they like would not have cared. But so I was spending a lot of my money there because I thought that as a 23-year-old, that's what I should care about. I should care about clothes and skincare and beauty and all of these things. Now that I've gone through the exercise of realizing like what do I actually value, that's probably the category that I spend the least on.
And I think you touch on a really important point there, and it's knowing who you are, knowing what you value, and then being able to make decisions that cater to those things. Like if I value luxury goods, then okay, I can save up. I can make very intelligent decisions on what to spend my money on because that brings me joy. For me personally, travel is hands down. I spend all my money on plane tickets, but I love it. I enjoy it. At the end of the day, it is always worth it to me.
Yeah. And I will say this too, is that I think that this process is kind of like twofold. It's one, getting to know yourself on a deep level to say, what is it that I value and what is it that's important to me? But I also think too that these priorities will change depending on the phase of life that you're in, right? Because like for me, being a mom, like a new mom to a little baby, like I'm not like travel at this point in my life is not important to me right now. Luxury goods at this point in my life is not important to me right now.
For anyone listening who feels like they're kind of lost in their spending habits, like they're spending money on things and they're like, well, this kind of stuff used to make me happy. I used to enjoy spending money on this. I feel a little bit lost with my wallet currently. What's something that listeners can do to kind of maybe reintroduce themselves to themselves in terms of how do I actually enjoy spending money?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with, I think it's just a matter of like listening to yourself and trusting yourself. And also understanding like it's okay for things to change and evolve. So I'm really big on just like listening to your feelings, your intuition, your gut, and just kind of like letting that guide you. And so I always say, like, if you like kind of have a feeling about something, like something is a little bit off, like use that as a first step to kind of lead you down this path. And what I say is like the best indication to know that like, yes, this is an aligned purchase is, does it feel good when I make the purchase? But also, does it still feel good a week, a month, 90 days later?
Kind of sit with it.
Yeah, because there's a big difference between, oh, that felt really good in the moment to spend that money and to buy that thing. But a week went by and now I'm like completely disinterested in it and I'm like on to the next thing. That's completely different than I bought this thing. It was so fun buying it. I still feel like it's a really good use of my financial resources.
When you are at this point, when you can acknowledge my spending is different than your spending, how do you comfortably talk about that with people in your life in a way that doesn't make you feel uncomfortable?
Yeah. Well, let's just say this. I mean, I think just like addressing the elephant in the room is that for a lot of us, talking about money is uncomfortable. And so I think like even just give yourself a pat on the back if you even are having those conversations in the first place.
I so agree with
because the truth is that like the fact that you're even like having this conversation puts you ahead of 90% of most people. And I think it's so important that you have those conversations. But I think one of the best things that you can do for yourself to not let those conversations kind of spiral you is to have the self-confidence of no one knows what's best for me more than I know what's best for me. And I think this is so huge with money because I think with money, when you come into adulthood, and this is especially true with women, right? Not all women, but I see this a lot because most of my community is women. Money has just been this topic that we've been told our entire lives that we're just inherently bad at, that we're not good at, and that we need to look outside of us for all of the answers and all of the solutions. And so many of us don't trust ourselves to say like, no, like my parents don't know best. My friends don't know best. This influencer on my phone doesn't know best. Like I know what's best. And so for me, if I want to spend most of my discretionary income on travel and BFF number one over here, like, doesn't do that because she would rather take her discretionary income and spend that on maybe like a designer handbag. Neither one of those solutions is like better than the other. Neither one of those is right or wrong if that's what's best for each of you individually, because you might get more value out of the travel. She might get more value out of the designer handbag. And so, yes, have those conversations, but I think the best thing that you can do is approach those conversations from a level of, I know what's best for me. And also understand too, that if other people disagree with you, it doesn't make it wrong. That's the thing about money is like,
Amen to that.
like,
Amen to that.
Yeah,
That's
like,
so applicable to so many things in life.
yeah, like with money, we tend to think about money as very like black and white. We tend to think of money with like rule, 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 rule. When in reality, money is mostly emotional and mental. And so if somebody's trying to tell you like, no, you should be doing this with your money, you should be spending your money here, 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 what a lot of us will hear is rule, rule, rule. This is a rule I need to be following. But if you can shift that to just saying, okay, this is this person's perspective, this is their money lens, this is the way that they see money, which directs the way that they think money should be handled and spent. But that doesn't mean that that's what's best for me.
Okay, so now I'd love to hear you speak more about people's upbringing. You know, like, money is not a one-size-fits-all approach, but I feel like for a lot of people, maybe in the like young 20-something categories, somebody such as myself even, you know, like we're out of college, we're in our first big jobs, and we're looking at money like our parents look at money because that's all that we've ever known. You know, that's how I was taught to look at money. Say somebody wants to get out of that kind of loop and, you know, am I allowed to tiptoe into looking at money differently? How do I even go about that? You know, I didn't realize I could look at money differently. Like, what are my options? Maybe somebody doesn't love how they were raised around money. They don't love how their parents are around money. That could be a plethora of reasons. But I'm curious on what kind of advice you would give to that person.
Yeah, this is, I mean, we could honestly have like a 5-hour conversation about just this one question.
Money's hard.
It is.
It's hard.
And it's like, so like, I'm going to start with this analogy for you. Okay. I always say to think about money as an iceberg. So you have like the 10 to 20% of the iceberg above the water that you can actually see. That's the part of money that like most people are talking about, I would say 90% of the time. And that's like the tactical black and white, like how to budget, how to get out of debt, how to raise your credit score. All important, sure. But then you have the 80 to 90% that's underneath the surface of the water. That's like the psychology behind your money, the emotions behind your money. That's exactly what we're kind of tapping into here. This is the part of your money that most people never even give second thought to where when they do get to like making a budget or making a plan to get out of debt, and then they find that things are falling through the cracks, they're self-sabotaging, they're making a plan, but then they can't stick to the plan. And they're like, what's happening? What's going on? I'm like, well, let's look at the part of the iceberg that's underneath the surface of the water, which is like what you're talking about here, which is so critical. Your upbringing with money is absolutely impacting the way that you see money, manage money, and spend money as an adult. Most of your views on money are formed and cemented by age 7.
Wow.
Yeah.
By age 7? How is that possible?
7.
Do you really even know what money is?
I mean, well, and it's crazy. It's crazy to think about it too. Like if you actually think about money in your household growing up, like I'll say for me as a specific example, my parents, I never actually heard my parents like talking about money, but I could feel just the impact that money had in my household.
I see.
Right? Like my dad, when I was really young, he started a company and then the company went under and, you know, my parents had to like refinance the mortgage and like all this sort of stuff. So like, I never really heard my parents like fighting about money, but I do remember now as an adult thinking back on it, I felt the lack of it, right? And just like the anxiety and the stress and the tension that it caused. So I always say that like all of us kind of come into adulthood with this like backpack on. I call it like your money backpack. And in your money backpack are all of these like heavy bricks. And they're your beliefs about money, how money impacted you growing up. They're just the things that you think are true about money, but they're really just like other people's beliefs about money. So like if you grew up in a household, I'm just going to use 2 examples on both ends of the extreme. So like I have a lot of women that I work with who grew up in households where there either wasn't a lot of money or there was a perceived lack of money. So you were actually in a situation where, you know, there wasn't a lot of money to go around. Maybe there was some food insecurity. Maybe, you know, you knew that your parents had a lot of debt, or a perceived lack of money, where this is kind of like my husband. Like, my husband grew up in a household where my in-laws, they always had a lot of money, but they acted like they never had any money.
I see.
And so my husband was always being told, like, no, you can't have that. We can't afford that. Like, that's stupid. That's frivolous. We're not going to spend money on that. So then those people come into adulthood and they've been told no their entire lives. And so they start making their own money and they're like, I'm sick of being told no. I've been told no my entire life. So now that I have my own money, I'm never going to tell myself no.
Yes.
And I'm going to go out and I'm going to say yes to everything. And like, woohoo, and they start spending. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where it's like, I have a lot of women who tell me I was never told no. Like, I grew up in a household where I was basically given like whatever I wanted. I'm using the word that they use. They're like, I was spoiled rotten. Like, I was like never told no. And then I became an adult with my own money and I just wanted to keep that going. And I also didn't want to tell myself no. So you can kind of come to like the same place from a lot of different situations. But I think the important thing to understand is like your childhood and the way that your caregivers saw money, managed money, talked about money, and even just like the feeling that it created, like what I was talking about, definitely impacts you as an adult. And so you're going to come into adulthood with your money backpack, with all of these bricks, which are like your beliefs about money. But I think it's key to, one, understand that these are beliefs. They are not facts of the world. Because if you view them as facts of the world, you're just going to accept them and just be like, well, this is just the way that the world works. And it's like, no, that's just how this one person saw money. It's not like how the whole world operates, right? So one, seeing it as a belief. Two, actually taking it out of your backpack and like evaluating it to say, does this belief serve me in the life that I want to live? So do I like this belief? Does it feel true to me? Does it make me feel good? Do I feel empowered by this thought or belief? And if the answer is like no to any of those questions, you can just decide to like just throw the brick. Just be like, I'm throwing it back. I'm not putting this back in my backpack. Like, I don't have to keep lugging this around with me because all it's doing is just like weighing me down and keeping me from where I want to go. And so then we start the process of forming new beliefs. And so it's kind of like evaluating like, well, what do I want to believe about money? What are thoughts and beliefs about money that I feel like would empower me, that would serve me better? I just want to say too that like, I know I'm going through this process quickly, but like this is a process that could literally take years. Okay, so it's not like, oh, like check. Like, I've done these 3 steps now, like, you know, can check that off the box. Like, I mean, this is a process that I've been going through for like a decade.
You make a great point. I want to say that to anybody listening to this podcast that feels like they really want to go down this route of relearning and regaining this sense of empowerment and autonomy with their money, you are not in the wrong for wanting to do that. Don't feel ashamed to want to go down this path because it's long, it's hard, but I feel like it's important and I don't feel like enough people are doing it.
Yeah. And also understanding too that like, and I feel like the parents is the big one in this situation, like, because I think we get a lot of our beliefs about money from so many different places, right? From religion and education and friends and all that sort of stuff. But I think the big kind of feeder of that is either parents or caregivers, whoever raised you.
I want to transition now to the top part of that iceberg that you were talking about, that top 10, 20%.
Yeah.
So let's talk about credit card debt. How much is normal? How much is too much? Give us that the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, no, this is all great. This is good stuff. So I will say this, like with the line of work that I do with overspending, impulse shopping, I would say that 90% of the women in my world who are in my community are in some form of credit card debt. So the first thing I need you to hear about credit card debt is like, if you are in credit card debt, you are not alone and it's not something that you need to be ashamed about. So you said, what's normal? Right?
What's normal and what's too much?
What's normal? I will tell you normal. The average household right now, according to the latest census, is that the average household carries just under $8,000 of revolving credit card debt. Okay. Even though that's normal, I'm a big fan of using credit cards in a way that is going to help you versus hurting you. And I can kind of break down what that looks like. Just because the normal is having $8,000 in credit card debt,
That means don't strive to have 8,000.
that means don't strive to be the normal, everybody. Just because it's the average, that's not what I'm suggesting, okay? Here's how I say how to use credit cards to help you versus hurt you. One is making sure that anything that you put on a credit card, you always have that money in your checking account at that point in time. That's really key and really critical, because if you don't, or if you get yourself into what I call the credit card float, which is like, well, I'm going to put this on a credit card right now, and then when I get paid again, then I'll have the money to pay for this thing.
Then you're always a step behind.
That way, you're not getting yourself into a situation where the debt starts to revolve, which means that it's just kind of like hanging out there, balance to balance to balance, and that means you're paying really, really sky-high costly interest.
Do you have any crazy stories of people spending?
Oh, I mean, I have women in my community who are in six figures worth of credit card debt. Yeah, it's not uncommon. Like, so here's one tool that I really, really like. So if you are going to be a credit card user, something that I use and I've used for years and years and years is a budgeting software that's called YNAB, Y-N-A-B. It stands for You Need a Budget.
Love that.
And it's basically just like a budgeting software. It's kind of either like a Mint or like a Rocket Money or like an Every Dollar. It's the same thing. But the reason that I really like YNAB, especially for credit card users, is because it will link to your credit cards. Most of them do that nowadays. It's going to pull in all of your credit card spending, which is key. You need to be tracking your credit card spending. If you are only looking at your credit card spending when your statement comes in the mail or when it pops into your email inbox once a month,
You're late.
no dice.
Okay.
Like that's how we get into a situation where you're like, it didn't seem like that much. It was like $15 here and $30 here and, $7 here, but it really starts to pile up, and then you get your statement and you're like, whoa.
What are some things that people need to know about credit scores?
There's two major factors that play into your credit score that kind of tie with credit cards, and they happen to be the two factors that are most heavily weighted in your credit score. One is on-time payment history. That's the most heavily weighted factor. It's weighted at about 35% of your overall score. And so it's it's really important that you make your payments on time. Like whether we're talking about a credit card or a car payment or a student loan payment, any type of debt payment, do whatever you can to make that payment on time. Something only gets reported as a late payment until it's 30 days late. But once it does get reported to the credit bureaus as a late payment, it's going to stay on your report for 7 years, which is a long time.
That's very long.
Until it falls off.
No.
And it's the most heavily weighted factor. So I'm like, for the love of God, whatever you do, just do whatever you can to make your payments on time. And here's the thing. If you have credit cards, what I want you to do right now is go into your credit cards, all of them, and set up an automatic payment for the minimum balance. And then the second most important part about responsible credit card usage is the second factor in your score, which is something that's called credit utilization. And utilization is the part where the credit score algorithm looks to see, is this person using debt responsibly?
Okay.
So when you get a credit card, there's something on your credit card called a limit, which is the credit card being like, your card has a limit of $5,000, which is saying you can spend up to $5,000 on this card. I feel like I'm going to lean in to say this. Just because you have a card with $5,000 limit doesn't mean spend $5,000 on the card. So what you really want to be doing is you actually only want to be using a small fraction of that limit. And that's the utilization.
Yeah, that's the fine print that they don't tell you.
Yeah, that's your credit utilization. That's basically saying, how much of the credit that I have available to me am I actually utilizing?
Right.
And that's the part that signals responsible credit card use. One common question that I get is what's the fastest way that I can raise my credit score? The first one that I gave you with the late payment,
right?
There's really nothing you can do about that once it's on there. Again, you just got to wait 7 years.
7 years.
There's nothing you can do about that.
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck there. But with the utilization, that's actually the quickest way that you can raise your credit score. So if you know that there's something coming up that you're going to need your credit score to be as high as possible, check your utilization to say, where is my utilization at? And make sure that your utilization is in a healthy range across all of your cards.
there's this concept called girl math that's going around on social media, and I'd love for you to kind of briefly explain what it is and give me your thoughts on it, because there's a lot to that.
It's so funny. I feel like on TikTok I've been crowned girl math's enemy. Like people people will come to my videos and they'll be like, so what you're saying is like the opposite of girl math. And I'm like, yes.
Yep.
So, okay, girl math, super quick, is, if anyone doesn't know, it's a trend in social media that took off earlier this year. And it's basically like the mental gymnastics that we all go through to like justify making purchases. So like a couple of examples are like, if it's cash, it's free. If it's under $5, it's free. If I make a return, it's like I'm making money. If I spent money on something, like for a concert that's like 6 months down the road, by the time the concert gets here, it's like that money was free. If I have to pay something out of my Venmo account, it's not real, it's free. Okay.
Right.
Okay, so like those are examples. So here are a couple things. The first thing I always like to acknowledge with girl math is like, I get it. I understand it's a joke. Okay. I understand that like there's a huge like humor component behind it. Okay. And I can have a good laugh just as much as like the next person. But I do think that there like are a couple of things where it's like, let's just kind of like think about this for a second. Because one, I think it really does kind of fuel this really harmful stereotype that we were talking about earlier, that women are just inherently bad with money, because actually there have been many studies that show that men make impulse purchases just as much as women. And when they do, they spend more on average.
Actually, that's a great point. I didn't even put two and two together that quote unquote girl math. Girl. Like,
yeah.
Why is it not just math?
This should just be called human math.
Yeah.
Because like male brains do this and female brains do this. But it's like, why? It just feeds the stereotype that like women are not only bad with money, but like the things that we choose to spend our money on are wasteful and frivolous and dumb and stupid, and we can't be trusted to spend our own money wisely. The biggest thing that I see with this trend that just makes me go, ooh, this is like kind of a slippery slope, is it starts to detach you from your money, where it's like, oh, if it's in my Venmo account, it's not real. If it's in my Starbucks app, it's not real. If it's cash, it's not real. It's like, when you start to detach yourself from your money, and when you start to say like, oh, my money isn't real, then what does it matter how you spend it? What does it matter what you spend it on? And when your money doesn't feel real, it's like the consequences or the ripple effects of like how you choose to manage and spend your money also don't feel real, even though they are. Girl math to me seems more of just like a justification, where like there's no possible outcome where I don't spend this money. It's just like I've already like decided in my head that like I want to do this, I want to spend this money, or like I'm going to spend this money, and this is just how I'm making myself feel better about making a choice that I know isn't in my best interest.
And I feel like that last part is the hard part. It is the hardest part that I kind of grapple with girl math. Is it's like in your own mind you're doing this mental gymnastics because internally you know that it's not the wisest decision. And instead of admitting that it's not the wisest decision, you're going to coddle yourself and make yourself feel better and say, actually, it is. It's just girl math. It's okay.
Right. An example I often use a lot is my dip manicures. Well, ASMR. You will not pry these dip manicures out of my cold, lifeless, dead hands. Like, you will not. Like, my $55 dip manicures, like, they are here. Yeah, they are here to stay. Okay? Convenience, personal development, and dip manicures.
Check, check.
Yeah, check, check, check. Because I used to have a really bad problem of, like, picking out my nails and picking out my cuticles. Like, my whole life I struggled with it. And then I discovered dip manicures, and there was just something about it to where it's, like, thick and I can't do it. And so literally like dip manicures truly like not only saved my fingers, but also just like brought me back that confidence that I felt like I never had, because I was always like having to hide my fingers and like no one, because they were just, I mean, they were torn to shreds.
Yeah, yeah.
And so people look at that and they're like, oh, manicures, that's so dumb. That's so stupid. Like, what a waste. Like, that's so frivolous. Like, oh, that's such like a girly thing to spend your money on. And I'm like, but it's not to me.
Right.
Like it's way more than that.
Keyword to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Which again goes back to like finding a sense of empowerment in your decisions with your money.
And I think that that's like a great point, because it's like, just because you don't see value in it doesn't mean it's not incredibly valuable to someone else.
Right.
One term that I don't allow in my community is waste of money. I'm like, don't ever tell somebody else that something is a waste of money. you can decide that something is a waste of money to you, but that doesn't mean that it's a waste of money to somebody else. Like, you don't know the value that someone else is getting out of what they choose to spend their money on.
We love ending every episode with one key takeaway that listeners can drop in their group chats. What is something that will blow everyone's mind?
Well, I think one of like the best mindset shifts that you can make for your spending overall is starting to really view your spending habits as a skill and not just something that like you're inherently good at or bad at. And I think with money, there's a lot of different facets of money where we think like we go into it knowing and understanding that like I'm going to have to learn how to do this. Like investing is a good example. None of us really like expect to come into adulthood and just like know how to start investing. Like we understand like, oh, I'm going to have to learn how to do this. When you think about it like, oh, this is just something that I should be inherently good at and I'm not good at it, you think like, well, that's it. That's just the hand that I was dealt.
Towel in.
Yeah, like I'm just going to be bad at this. This wasn't meant for me. I can't do this. Like I'm just going to have to accept that this is just something I'm going to be bad at. When really it's like, no, this is just like driving a car.
Right. It's a skill.
like,
You can
before
work.
you learn to drive a car, it's not like you were like, I'm so terrible at driving.
Right.
And then it's like, but I haven't learned how to drive yet. And it's like, well, of course you're a bad driver. You haven't learned how to drive yet. That's how you have to think about spending money. Spending is a skill. It's not something that you should just inherently know how to do.
Amazing. Well, Paige, thank you so much for joining us today. This was awesome.
Thank you. This is so fun.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Hot Girls Have. You can find anything we mentioned in our show notes. Want more? Visit our website or check out our social media. This podcast is brought to you by Belly Welly, leading the charge in women's gut health.